If you work with someone who always thinks they're right, I mean, every conversation turns into a battle. Today, you'll learn the psychology behind their behavior, what's happening in your brain when you deal with them, and the tools that help you communicate, set boundaries, and stop getting pulled into power struggles with them. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Workplace Therapy with Dr. Ivy Metcalf. You know that that's me. So, if you have ever worked with someone who always has the correct answer, is that only me that's worked with these people? Always knows better, always needs a last word, always finds a way to dismiss your perspective, any of that, you know how exhausting it is. It, really wears down your confidence. It obviously slows down any collaboration. It creates tension. You can usually feel in your body the moment they walk into the room because you're just waiting, for that struggle to start. But here's what's really true underneath all that. I know this is hard sometimes to really take in, but someone who always thinks they're right, they're not confident. They're fragile. They have a very narrow set of beliefs. They feel safe inside, and anything that threatens those beliefs gets shut down before it can register. So in those moments, it's really what's helped me. I remember that I'm not dealing with strength. I'm dealing with self-protection. I'm dealing with psychological self-protection. That's what I'm, engaged in. And your reaction isn't about weakness either. It's not like you're weak because you're getting pulled in. When someone bulldozes your perspective or corrects you constantly, it activates your brain's threat systems around autonomy, which is really big, competence and belonging. I've talked about these before on this podcast. And I think on my Relationships Made Easy podcast too, but those three, autonomy, competence, and belonging, are really big. And the research shows that social evaluation, meaning thinking that people are evaluating us socially, triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. I've used that bit of research over and over and over in this because it really comes up a lot at work because there's so much evaluation. And obviously you can think about how this translates to social media, how it translates to, when your mother says something about your hair or whatever. Is that just Jewish women who hate that? As you get feedback maybe from family or people that you find really important or your partner, you could see how this is. Think about that. So someone evaluating you socially is literally, your brain takes it as there's physical pain, like you've been shot. And that, you end up with like a perceived loss of status or influence. And that is what's activating your defensive reactions. So when you get reactive, when you get frustrated, when you shut down, you're not being, oversensitive or dramatic or something. It's your nervous system responding to a threat to your value. And that is a very big deal. That is why it's just so much when we have somebody who in our lives who always thinks they're right and wants to let you know how right they are. So why are some people like this? Why do some people always think they're right? The behavior is not random. It really comes from predictable, again, research-backed psychological patterns. And in my experience, what I see, and like when I was writing this up, I was like, there's really 5 main reasons some people always think they're right. And obviously they overlap a bit. But one is they're protecting their identity. Being right makes them feel safe. Being wrong feels like humiliation or exposure. So people, again, with a fragile sense of self often rely on certainty to stabilize themselves. When their ideas are challenged, they feel personally threatened. So they get very tied to that. The second thing I see a lot is that, all of our brains have something called confirmation bias, which I've talked about before. And I think that these people who always have to be right, don't get me wrong, I enjoy being correct quite a bit. but I don't always, I really don't. I go into situations, again, listening like I'm wrong, doing, trying to learn something, not prove something, all the things I talk about, I really try to do. No one's perfect. I don't do it all the time, but most of the time. So, but I think for these people, their brain has an extra strong confirmation bias. And remember, confirmation bias makes, it makes people seek information that confirms what they already believe, their existing beliefs, and ignore anything that contradicts them. So, and that bias gets stronger when you're stressed, insecure, when you're in high in anxiety, that kind of thing. So I think that's a second reason that I see a lot. The third thing is they learned early that control equals safety. This, it's back to our childhoods, right? Some people grow up in environments where being wrong had major consequences. So they learned that certainty kept them safe. And so they really hold on to it. I mean, again, it's a real threat not to be. The fourth thing I see a lot, especially in work environments, is that people confuse confidence with dominance. So they believe leadership means projecting certainty even when they don't have the facts. And that, again, that shows up in a lot of workplaces, especially the ones that reward decisiveness over accuracy. And I've seen that time and again where someone's getting promoted because they're good at that part and they seem so clear and sure, and they're the worst leaders, usually the worst managers. And the fifth thing I see is they lack what we call cognitive flexibility. Now, cognitive flexibility is your ability to shift your thinking when new information shows up, right? So you might really believe something, but you get new information and you go, oh, it's a big key in emotional intelligence. It's a big key part of problem solving. You gotta be good at this. So if you don't have it, you dig in, right? You really put your hands up. So, and I'm giving you those reasons. Those are like my top 5, not to justify this person's behavior, but I want you to stop taking it so personally. And I want you to start responding strategically. If, this is the thing I end up talking to people about a lot. So, and there's a reason you get so triggered, right? Because I know you're thinking why do I get so triggered by this person? Your brain reacts to people like this, like I said, because they hit those 3 core psychological needs. Okay. So they threaten your competence, right? That was the first psychological need. So when someone dismisses your ideas or they correct you, your brain is going to interpret that as an attack on your capability. And that activates the stress circuits in your brain and it reduces clear thinking. It turns on the amygdala, turns off the prefrontal cortex. It's pretty major. The second thing, right, is your autonomy. So when people are always right, they threaten your autonomy. You want a say and they want control. That's a problem. And that tension activates the same systems involved in fight or flight. Again, it signals your amygdala. And then the third thing is belonging, right? So, and being ignored or overridden, talked over, interrupted in a group context is going to really trigger, it triggers the same neural circuits as social exclusion. You're not imagining that sting. And again, for any of my new listeners, all the things I say are steeped in the research, and I link to all the research in the corresponding blog that goes with every episode. So you could get any of the research or the download. I have a great download for today, a free download. You can get any of that below the video if you're watching on YouTube. And if you if you're just listening, you can go to my website, abbymetcalf.com, and go to this episode, and you will find all the goodies there. So when you understand what's happening in your body, you can choose your response instead of reacting on instinct. And again, that's why I talk about all this. So how do you work with someone who always thinks they're right? And let me actually mention, so I do have this it's a free download to go with today's episode. I think I called it the rightness decoder. It's basically how to navigate people who always have to be right, right? And I'll give you everything that's in it at the end. But for now, let me give you my top. I came up with 7. I thought there were 7 top tools that actually work with this sort of personality type, this behavior type. Okay. So tool number one, don't argue with certainty. Someone who needs to be right isn't listening for insight. They're listening for threat. So arguing makes them double down and gets you nowhere. And you already know this is true because that's why you're listening, because you've already tried it. So instead, I want you to try saying, here's another way to look at it, or let's consider a few possibilities. You want to open the door without triggering their defensiveness if you can. Tool number two is you want to use collaborative language. So one of my favorite ones I use is, hey, let's look at this together, right? Let's look at this together. It's this collaborative language. What outcome are we trying to get to is one of my other favorites. It shifts the focus away from who's right and towards what works. And it really helps people relax because they're not fighting for their identity anymore. Tool number three, you want to ask questions instead of correcting. Questions reduce defensiveness. Statements increase it. I'm going to say it again, and this is true everywhere in your life. You know how I always say don't sack, don't offer suggestions, give advice, or criticize. Instead, ask collaborative questions. That's why I keep saying this. It's from the research. We know what happens in the brain. When you ask questions, a different part of the brain fires off than when you make a statement. This works with your kids. It works everywhere. So questions reduce defensiveness. When you make a statement, it increases defensiveness. So I ask things like, can you give me more, what led you to that conclusion? Like, let me hear more. What information would change your mind is also like, what would you need to hear to think differently about this? These questions I like because they make them articulate their reasons instead of just bulldozing what you said. Do you see the difference? I'm putting it sort of back on them very gently, very lovingly. Tool number four is to stay grounded, and you need to slow your roll, slow your pace. When you speak, I know, but it's real. When you speak more slowly and calmly, their nervous system attunes to yours, and this helps them drop out of reactivity so conversations don't escalate. It's called co-regulation. It's very important. I did an episode for the Relationships Made Easy podcast on co-regulation. I actually don't know if it's out yet, though, by the time this is out. It might be. I'll link to it. If not, look up co-regulation on my website, and you'll find that episode. But I think these I record these at all different times, so I'm not always sure what's dropping when. But the co-regulation's a biggie. So, but if you can, this is true. If your child is upset, you don't go in and start screaming at them and escalate if you don't want them to be upset anymore, right? You want to, be calm yourself, and it calms people down. It's very true in these situations. Tool number 5 is I call them process boundaries. You want to set process boundaries. So if this person is constantly derailing meetings, interrupting, talking over other people, when I find that, when I'm working in groups at the companies I help, when I do leadership training and things like that, or if I'm helping a group of executives get better with what they're doing, work better together, when I see that, I will stop it and go, hey, let's make sure we stay on track. Let's finish this point, and then we can come back to your idea. It's a way to redirect without attacking. And when you do that enough in a meeting, the person stops. They get the point, because they do feel a little embarrassed no matter how much you do it, because they get halted. And, it helps. Obviously, you can also just say, listen, you're interrupting, you need to stop. Obviously you can be as direct as you want to be. Most of these tools I'm giving you because you've probably not been successful with what you've been doing. And so I'm trying to give you other ways to do it. Tool number 6 is to validate without surrendering. So, validation isn't agreement. It's acknowledgement. I'm going to say that again. This is true with anybody, with your partner, with your kids, with your mom, with coworkers, with your boss. Validation isn't agreement. It's acknowledgement. And you need to remember that, because this is the reason a lot of people don't validate, because they think it means that the other person thinks they're agreeing with whatever they're saying or doing. So I might say something like, hey, I see why that makes sense to you. Here's something else. Here's another factor I'm considering. And that preserves their dignity while keeping the conversation open, something like that. And again, I have more in the toolkit, the free download for today with like scripts for this and things like that. Tool number 7, the last one, is you have to protect your energy. You don't owe them emotional regulation. I want to say that. I talked about the co-regulating and trying to get, check yourself before you wreck yourself kind of stuff, but you do not owe them emotional regulation. If you're too activated to engage, if you can't get yourself to a calm place, you want to pause the conversation and come back to it another time. And you can say that, right? Hey, let's revisit this once we both have a minute to think. You're not shutting down. You're creating a boundary. You're setting a boundary around your time, around your emotional bandwidth, around what you will and won't accept. And these are really important things. So I want to wrap up by saying that, working with someone who always thinks they're right isn't about managing their ego. That's the mistake I think I see most people making. It's about managing the psychological dynamics underneath their behavior. And when you understand why they cling to certainty and why it triggers you, you're really going to gain your access to your agency, your calm, your power, your clarity. And that's why, that's why we're doing this today. You want to set boundaries, you want to redirect conversations, ask strategic questions, stay grounded. That's your job, instead of getting pulled into debates that you're never going to win. You already know you're not. You're not trying to change them. You're learning how to protect your energy and hold your voice inside the relationship. Okay, so putting today's lesson into action, all this talk is great, but it doesn't help you unless you take action, right? And apply the strategies. So as I mentioned, I have a great free download for today, which I'm calling the Rightness Decoder. How to navigate people right who always have to be right. So what I have in there is it's a personality decoder to identify, I think there's different certainty patterns, and I help you identify which certainty pattern you're dealing with. And then I give you a list of phrases that diffuse defensiveness for that particular type while keeping your message intact, right? And then I have a meeting script for redirecting an interrupter or a derailer, and a quick self-check, to keep you grounded when you feel overridden. So all that is in there. It's like, it's one page, but I have, or 2 pages maybe, but I have a lot in there. It's like a 5-minute thing to do. And I always want to be transparent. Anytime you download anything from me, a free download or buy something, it doesn't matter. You go on my love letter list, which is just that. Twice a month, you will get a emailed what I call my love bites. It's just a little something to help you think differently about your week. If you like the podcast and how I talk, you'll love the love letter. There's tens of thousands of people on there. And I do not sell anything. I do not spam you. You don't go in some weird funnel where you're getting 20 emails, nothing like that. Just twice a month, you'll get this. If you don't like it, unsubscribe. I'm just really trying to be in your head as often as possible, helping you shift how you think about your life, your world, giving you maybe a little tip or a new vantage point, a new way of thinking about something. That's all I'm trying to do. So yeah, I'm trying to control you, but not, I think, in a bad way. I'm trying to help you feel more happy, fulfilled, satisfied, at peace, and trying to give you more ways to do that. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll talk to you real soon.